Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll examine a number of stories and issues in the news. We begin with the jailbreak in the House, where 4 Republicans broke ranks to join with the Democrats in a discharge petition to save the Affordable Care Act, going around Speaker Johnson, who faithfully follows orders from Trump. Joining us to discuss the mad and fact-free diatribe Trump spewed forth to the nation last night, telling us how bad Biden was and how great he is Mike Lofgren, who formerly spent 28 years working in the Congress as a Republican aide, 16 of which as a senior analyst on the House and Senate budget committees. He's the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Party Is Over, How Republicans Went Crazy, Democrats Became Useless, and the Middle Class Got Shafted. His latest article at Salon is Trump Regime Isn't Fascist, Claims Leading Intellectual. It Just Looks That Way. Then, with Trump announcing a naval blockade of tankers exporting Venezuelan oil, and the Venezuelan Navy now escorting these tankers with the U.S. Navy on the horizon poised to strike, we will discuss what could go wrong with Francisco Rodríguez, a senior research fellow at the Center for Economic and Policy Research and a faculty affiliate at the University of Denver's Joseph Corbell School of International Studies. A native of Venezuela, he's also the founder of Oil for Venezuela, a non-profit organization focused on finding solutions to Venezuela's humanitarian crisis. His latest book is The Collapse of Venezuela, Scorched Earth Politics and Economic Decline, 2012 to 2020. And he has an article at the Financial Times, Trump Needs an Off-Ramp in Venezuela. Sanctions and threats haven't brought regime change, but a deal could curb drugs and migration while hastening democratic reforms. Then finally we will speak with Tim Wu, the Julius Silver Professor of Law, Science and Technology at Columbia Law School, first known for coining the term net neutrality in 2002. In 2021, he was appointed to serve in the White House as Special Assistant to the President for Technology and Competition Policy. The author of The Master Switch and The Attention Merchants, his latest book just out is The Age of Extraction, How Tech Platforms Conquered the Economy and Threaten Our Future Prosperity. And before we begin, for over a decade, we've warned that Trump is both a criminal and likely a traitor, not to mention he's mentally unstable, egomaniacal, woefully ignorant, wildly incompetent, insatiably greedy, and corrupt. Now it should be clear to all that his chaotic misrule must be ended as soon as possible, and until that happens, Background Briefing will continue to investigate and expose MAGA criminality and cruelty. But more importantly, explore strategies and popular movements to bring about regime change as quickly as possible to restore democracy and civility and stop the systematic destruction of the United States at home and its standing abroad. To help sustain us with public broadcasting and freedom of the press itself under assault as Trump's billionaire buddies buy up the mainstream media, you can make a tax-deductible donation to our nonprofit foundation, the Public Truth Media Foundation, at publictruthmedia.org or at backgroundbriefing.org/donate. And thank you. And joining us now is Mike Lofgren, who formerly spent 28 years working in Congress as a Republican aide, 16 of which were as a senior analyst on the House and Senate budget committees. He's the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Party Is Over, How Republicans Went Crazy, Democrats Became Useless, and the Middle Class Got Shafted. And his latest article at Salon is Trump Regime Isn't Fascist, Claims Leading Intellectual. It Just Looks That Way. Welcome to Background Briefing, Mike Lofgren.
Good to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us, Mike. And last night, President of the United States addressed the nation in a absolutely shouting, mad, fact-free diatribe that consisted mostly of telling us how terrible Joe Biden is and how great he is. What is with this pathetic man? He takes the nation's attention in order to tell us absolute nonsense in an alternative universe, how he inherited this terrible economy, which everybody in the world and all the economists, including The Economist magazine and others, say, no, you actually were handed the best economy in the world, and look what you've done with it. I mean, is this going to fly? Are we that stupid in this country to accept the ramblings of this sad and sick man?
Well, he's not only psychotic, he's criminally psychotic. But he is not, alas, the problem. The real he represents the problem. He embodies the problem. The problem is the 77 million people, 77 million Americans who voted for him. How many of those will peel off? How many will decide that, yes, tariffs actually do raise prices, and yes, the consumer, actually does pay for them? If they realize that, then he's sunk. But then we've seen over the last 9 years how they tend to stick with him through thick and thin.
Well, but how could they not notice? I mean, this is coming from a person who's, incredibly stupid, because we saw in the last time around where he talked about shining a light inside your body and drinking bleach as a cure for COVID. That is pretty ridiculous and insane. And you realize that this guy just is dangerously ignorant. But the fact that he's stuck with this insane idea, this stupid idea that the Chinese pay for the tariffs and not the American consumer, because it is a consumption tax, everybody knows that. And he sticks with it, which it indicates to me that he actually believes it. What do you think?
Well, I said psychotic. Probably does. And again, his election sort of levered up this big, huge moss-covered boulder, and now we see what's underneath in this country. People who will go along with the absolute craziest and stupidest ideas, because it's not a case of party politics as we have known it for the last 200 plus years. It's basically a cult.
Well, there's certainly the people that he's collected are the most unqualified bunch of bottom feeders imaginable in the highest possible position. So it goes beyond Trump. The damage is so much more than Trump, with RFK Jr. destroying the health of America, Pam Bondi destroying law and order and the rule of law in America, Kash Patel destroying counterintelligence and law enforcement, and Pete Hegseth destroying the much ballyhooed military that everybody is proud of and this Congress keeps throwing money at. He's destroying that. And of course, on top of all this, you've got Trump sucking up to our enemies, Xi Jinping and his best buddy, Putin, selling out Ukraine and insulting our allies. So there's a madness out there, or is there a method to the madness? Does this guy, is he put on earth to destroy America, or is he working on Putin's agenda to destroy America?
I don't think it's either or. I think it's both. And one correction I would make is when you say somebody's unqualified, well, there are millions of people, the vast majority of Americans would be unqualified for those jobs. But if you just picked up a name out of a list at random and put them in the job, they might be willing to learn. They might be willing to listen to people with experience. In the case of practically every single appointee in the Trump regime, it's not just unqualified. They have negative qualifications. They are the worst possible person that you could put in that job.
So I can add one to that list, and that's Speaker Johnson, who's just a pathetic little sycophant, claims to be a good Christian, wears his religion on his sleeve, and yet ignores the victims of Epstein, shuts down the Congress to protect Trump and Maxwell and all these horrible people, and more importantly, all of the Johns, the rich and powerful men who should be in jail, that Trump and Pika Johnson, the good Christian, are protecting. But it looks like little Mikey Johnson's losing his grip. And another discharge petition. How do you see it? Because it looks as if Trump is losing his grip, and his loyal adjutant, Mike Johnson, no longer controls the Republican caucus.
Oh, that's right. I mean, it used to be, one would have thought Newt Gingrich and Dennis Hastert were horrible speakers, but Mike Johnson outdoes both of them in terms of making the Congress of the United States totally dysfunctional. Now, the thing about the discharge petition that listeners should understand is it is by definition an act of defiance, and it has very rarely garnered 218 signatures. I looked this up, since 1935, fewer than 4% of petitions were successfully discharged, and of those, only 8% get passed. It used to be sort of an option of last resort. Not now. Even some Republicans are using it, as an option of first resort, since Johnson won't do anything. We've already had the Epstein discharge petition got discharged and passed, and now we have the Obamacare extension discharged. Now, the Speaker will not schedule a vote, so that this will go on until at least early January before there's a vote. And on January 1st, those subsidies for the Affordable Care Act expire. In one sense, that might be good, because regardless of what happens in the House, the Senate, of course, has the filibuster, and they've already defeated a clean extension of the Affordable Care Act. But if voters in their states lose their health insurance, it could put some pressure to get at least 6 more senators to switch their votes.
So how much damage there will be done if it's over? If the subsidies expire on January the 1st, how much longer? I mean, people are going to be forced to spend 3 times as much. Will they have to cut checks? Will they have to sacrifice food and gas and other things in order to keep their health care? Or will they lose it?
Well, they'll lose it on January 1st. And, how serious it is simply depends on how fast the House and Senate move.
Well, I wouldn't count on that, would you?
No, absolutely not.
So then what explains why would Johnson and Toon go along with Trump, who claims he's got an alternative but doesn't, and talks about the Unaffordable Care Act, which is the opposite of what it is, because it has reduced the cost. It's not, they're not working for the insurance industry. It's the Republicans who are working for the insurance industry. At the end of the day, this is a case of them voting against their own interest, isn't it? They got to go home and face these angry constituents.
Well, people in these gerrymandered districts don't have to face that. And certain states, you don't think that Wyoming is going anytime soon to vote Democratic. They don't care. If people die, they don't care.
But they will be dying, some of them.
Meaning the constituents?
Yeah. A lot of Republicans rely on the Affordable Care Act.
And how much did they care? How much did Trump care at the height of the COVID epidemic? Simply taking sensible precautions as far as wearing a mask. This was before the vaccines were widespread. Simply wearing a mask and employing sensible social distancing would greatly cut your risk of infection. And these were people saying that it didn't exist. It was a hoax, or that once vaccine was created, that it was to implant a microchip in people or some nonsense, or that the vaccination was more dangerous than the disease. So based on that template, I don't see they particularly care if people die from lack of health insurance.
Well, Mike, I don't know that they are the majority in this country. I don't think they are. And if they are, then we are truly doomed.
Well, they're certainly not a majority, but the majority doesn't necessarily rule when you have all these gerrymandered districts.
Right. Well, I thank you for joining us. I wish it wasn't so bleak, but I guess it is. And this is happening at the time of the holiday season, so it couldn't be happening at a worse time. So
It's happening at a terrible time, but I think if you want to find a silver lining, Trump is starting to lose his grip on the Republican Party, I think, and Mike Johnson is losing his grip on the Republican majority in the House. And that gives us more options than if that were not the case.
well, Mark Lofgren, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you.
And again, I've been speaking with Mark Lofgren, who has formerly spent 28 years working in Congress as a Republican aide, 16 of which as a senior analyst on the House and Senate budget committees. He's the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Party is Over, How Republicans Went Crazy, Democrats Became Useless, and the Middle Class Got Shafted. And his latest article at Salon is Trump Regime Isn't Fascist, Claims Leading Intellectual. It Just Looks That Way. We're going to take a brief station break, back looking into Trump's naval blockade of tankers exploiting Venezuelan oil and the Venezuelan Navy now escorting these tankers with the U.S. Navy on the horizon poised to strike. What could go wrong?
Watch out. You might get what you're after. Cool babies. Stranger than a stranger. I'm an ordinary guy. Burning down the house. Hold tight. Wait till the party's over. Hold tight. We're in for nasty weather.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Francisco Rodríguez, who's a senior research fellow at the Center for Economic and Policy Research and a faculty affiliate at the University of Denver's Joseph Corbell School of International Studies. A native of Venezuela, he's also the founder of Oil for Venezuela, a non-profit organization focused on finding solutions to Venezuela's humanitarian crisis. His latest book is The Collapse of Venezuela, Scorched Earth Politics and Economic Decline, 2012 to 2020. And he has an article at the Financial Times, Trump Needs an Off-Ramp in Venezuela, Sanctions and Threats Haven't Brought Regime Change, but a Deal Could Curb Drugs and Migration While Hastening Democratic Reforms. Welcome to Background Briefing, Francisco Rodríguez.
Hi, Ian. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us, Francisco. And of course, last night there was an expectation that Trump might even announce some military action against Venezuela in this strange shouting speech that he made for 18 minutes last night, where he spent all of his time basically telling us how terrible Biden was and how great he is. And I guess we should consider it a blessing, right, that he didn't declare war on Venezuela, although he has instigated a naval blockade.
Yes, indeed. And the naval blockade may actually be more deadly than a war. This is something that is often not recognized or acknowledged, but I've published some research on this. I have an article that came out just earlier this year in the Lancet Global Health, in which we estimate the effect on mortality rates of economic sanctions. And we find, in fact, that economic sanctions around the world as a whole have a death toll associated with them, which is actually comparable to that of armed conflict, around 500,000 persons a year that we estimate die as a result of sanctions. And the sanctions, well, now it's called a blockade, but it's essentially the same idea behind sanctions. It's to block access of the economy to world markets and to not allow an economy to export. And in the case of Venezuela, it's focused on oil, but oil is essentially what this country exports. Oil accounts for more than 90% of the country's exports. And this is a classically import-dependent economy, so that if you actually deprive this economy of the foreign currency revenue that it uses to buy goods internationally, including food, including the inputs for producing food in its agricultural sector, and including medicines, this country is going to suffer through a massive humanitarian crisis, food shortages, and quite possibly a famine.
But before that happens, isn't there a likelihood of a military clash? Because the Venezuelan Navy is now escorting tankers out of the country, where you have this American naval fleet offshore, and apparently something like 40% of the tankers that export oil, that carry oil from Venezuela, are sanctioned because of they're part of the sort of ghost fleet, if you will. So I don't know how the U.S. is going to determine which tankers to try and intercept, and whether the Venezuelan Navy will not escort ghost tankers, but only legitimate tankers. It sounds like a recipe for what the military call kinetic action.
Yeah, well, yes, I mean, definitely there is the potential for the conflict to escalate and for us to have armed confrontation. But here's a puzzle, which is that the U.S. has not yet mobilized nearly the number of troops that it would need to invade Venezuela. So the U.S. currently, I mean, the deployment is a massive deployment of naval and air resources, but the combat troops that are actually assembled off the coast of the Caribbean are estimated at 16,000. And Venezuela's armed forces have a size of between 100 and 200,000. It's clear, it's not exactly clear, but let's say it's at least 100,000. If you look at past U.S. invasions, whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, Panama, Grenada, the U.S. has always counted with significant superiority in ground troops, and particularly in this case, the U.S. doesn't have a land base to carry out the operations because neither Colombia nor Brazil will lend their territory to station U.S. troops for an invasion of Venezuela. So it would have to be an amphibious invasion. And pretty much all military experts would say that actually, if you try to invade Venezuela with 16,000 U.S. soldiers, then actually Venezuela is going to win easily. So I think that what we're seeing, at least up until now, it looks more like a bluff. And, this is a thesis that many in the Venezuelan opposition and in the groups around Secretary Rubio have put forward, the idea of a credible threat, the idea that you just have to threaten with military action in order to lead the regime to crumble, to lead the military support of Maduro to disappear, and for them to turn on Maduro. But it hasn't worked before. We're now approximately 6 months into this strategy, and it's not working now. You don't see any signs that the military is breaking.
Well, short of an invasion, and you're right that they don't have the forces, it seems to me, from what I've heard from intel sources, that the plan is to go after leadership and after key figures in the military, and particularly the Cuban intelligence people that are in the country. Is that a possible scenario?
Sure it is, but I'm not sure that it would change that much. I mean, what does it mean to actually go after them? I mean, the first thing is that, if assassinating Maduro were so easy, I think that the US would have done it already. If assassinating Fidel Castro was so easy, if assassinating Saddam Hussein when he was in power was so easy. Even, the assassination of Soleimani, you have to remember, was done outside of Iranian territory. But inside a country's territory, we're it's not clear that the U.S. has the capacity to do this. I mean, it's difficult. It's not like, Venezuela doesn't have intelligence and it doesn't have a way to detect what's happening. And in fact, I mean, in the case of Cuba, there's a long history of this, but some of it is publicly well known by disclosures that were made to Congress, and the CIA tried for years to assassinate Fidel Castro, and they tried every single plot. I mean, including putting some material that was apparently going to kill him in his cigars, and none of them worked. So how else do you go after these leaders? Well, you can bomb the country, right? You can actually do an armed attack. And yes, I mean, if you throw a lot of bombs on Venezuela, you're gonna kill a lot of people. You're gonna kill a lot of Venezuelans, and you might kill Maduro, or you might not. And if you do, I don't actually think that that much changes. If you don't, the U.S. tried this in the 80s with Gaddafi in Libya. They bombarded Tripoli and they didn't kill Gaddafi, and Gaddafi stayed in power for 25 more years after that. When Gaddafi was finally overthrown with U.S. air support was when there was an armed insurrection. I mean, it's giving air support to an already existing armed insurrection, to a revolution, that can work, but that is not the case of Venezuela. There's no armed insurgency against the Maduro regime right now in Venezuela. So what's going to happen is that if you're lucky enough to kill Maduro, and to not kill a lot of ordinary Venezuelans, while you're doing it, you're just probably going to have somebody else in the Chavista hierarchy take control of the military. It's not like they're going to say, "Oh, Maduro's dead. Let's now give power over to Maria Corina Machado," because there's like a deeper problem. Is that the Venezuelan opposition has effectively said that it's going to throw all of the military leadership in jail. So, well, it's not hard to understand why the military leadership doesn't want to hand over power to them.
Not exactly a smart move, but then we don't have a very smart president. We have a sick and stupid president who, for example, believes that China is paying for the tariffs, and he insists on believing that, and he even talked about that last night. And the co-president, the guy that whispers in his ear, Stephen Miller, is an absolutely deranged ideologue. I mean, let me just quote you what Trump just said on social media. Venezuela is completely surrounded by the largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America. It will only get bigger, and the shock to them will be nothing they have ever seen before. And then he went on to say that this operation will continue until Venezuela returns, quote, all of the oil, land, and other assets that they previously stole from us. And this will happen, quote, in caps, immediately. And Stephen Miller has said, American sweat, ingenuity, and toil created the oil industry in Venezuela. Its tyrannical expropriation was the largest recorded theft of American wealth and property. These pillaged assets were then used to fund terrorism and flood our streets with killers, mercenaries, and drugs. Now, that's the usual hyperbole from that guy, but he is the second most powerful person in the White House. And I'm certainly not using polite or the usual journalistic language to describe Trump, but I think he is, after watching him last night, he is a very sick and dangerous man, and somewhat unhinged. And what these two clowns are doing, if they really want to do regime change in Venezuela, the worst thing you can do is go after the oil, because everybody in Venezuela, that is their national treasure. And this is going to just absolutely backfire, isn't it?
I agree totally. In fact, President Trump has recently been saying that the Maduro government has infiltrated the United States through the Tren de Agua. He even referred to the governor of Colorado as being following orders from the Tren de Agua. And, there's a moment in which I'm actually tempted to take that seriously in the sense that I cannot imagine how you could come up with a strategy to communicate what the president is doing in Venezuela that would be more helpful to Nicolas Maduro than what Trump and Stephen Miller said. So I would imagine that there's actually somebody maybe from the Tren de Agua infiltrated in the White House kind of writing these tweets. And this is exactly what Maduro wants. They, for Venezuelans, the oil industry is their source of pride. The fact that it belongs to Venezuela. I mean, this is like, I don't know, like hamburgers for Americans. I mean, it's like American football, it's almost as if you had the British say that the Americans should, I don't know, rename American football or something like that, or give them back all the football. Really, it's something that is so constitutive of Venezuelan identity that all of a sudden to have the president of the US say, you have to give us your oil because you stole your oil from us. I mean, the oil that is in Venezuela that is under the ground in Venezuela, that is the great source of wealth of Venezuela. I mean, this is something that only Nicolas Maduro's campaign manager could come up with. And in fact, I mean, it's been such a disaster for the Venezuelan opposition that Maria Corina Machado, the opposition leader, has stayed silent. She hasn't said anything with respect to this. I mean, up until Sunday, she was saying that she supported Trump's actions, but now she can't say anything. She knows that she can't say that she's going to give that oil back to the U.S. Now let's stop for a minute and think and consider also Trump's claims because they're also very confused. And Trump was saying that Venezuela had stolen oil from the U.S. Well, Venezuela can't steal its oil from the U.S. because that oil could never have belonged to the U.S., to the United States, to U.S. firms. There's a Venezuelan constitution that says that, and it's not just the 1999 constitution that was approved by Chavez. It's actually a a longstanding principle in Venezuelan law that predates the 1999 Constitution that effectively states that the oil resources, oil and hydrocarbons and mining, belong to the Venezuelan Republic and are inalienable. What does that mean? That means that they cannot be sold. So if Venezuela had actually sold that, or given it in some way to American companies, it would have been illegal. But of course, it didn't. The American companies had investments, and these investments, they initially entered into them because they signed contracts with the Venezuelan state-owned oil company, where Venezuela told these American companies, if you help us exploit these fields, we will pay you for it. So they're contractors. And then in 2007, Chavez said to them, we're going to change the law, and that's going to imply that these contracts that you guys had are no longer going to be legal. So we're going to invite you to migrate to another type of contract, which will be legal. Some of them took it. I mean, that's Chevron said yes. That's why Chevron is in Venezuela, because it accepted Chavez's renegotiation. Two companies, which were ExxonMobil and Conoco, said no. And then what did they do? Well, there's a way in which you orderly resolve contract disputes, because it's not like Venezuela was saying, "Oh, we're going to take this and we're not going to pay you." I mean, let's start out from a basic principle. If the state of Colorado wants to build a road through my house, they have the right to notify me. We're going to build a road here, and we're going to pay you the fair market value for your house. I don't have a choice. I can't say, no, don't build that road, build it somewhere else. I don't, that's a right that states have in the whole world. But what the state of Colorado has to do is compensate me for the value of my property. That's exactly what Chavez did. Chavez offered compensation to these firms, and these two firms, Exxon and Conoco, did not think that the compensation was fair. So how did they deal with it? Well, they resolved it in the way in which contract disputes are resolved. What did the contract that they have with Venezuela say? That contract disputes would be settled by an arbitration tribunal, which was the World Bank Arbitration Tribunal. So Conoco and Exxon went to the World Bank Arbitration Tribunal, and interestingly enough, the World Bank ruled essentially in favor of Venezuela in the Exxon case. I mean, in the end, it offered a compensation to Exxon, which was less than what Venezuela had offered it. It ruled in favor of Conoco, and it did grant Conoco a relatively sizable compensation. And Venezuela started paying Conoco. And Venezuela was paying Conoco up until 2018. Why did Venezuela stop paying Conoco? Because the U.S. imposed sanctions on Venezuela. The U.S. essentially made it impossible for Venezuela to pay Conoco. That's the end of story. I mean, Venezuela has never said that it doesn't recognize those claims. There was a difference with respect to how much should be paid. It was settled. Venezuela sent its attorneys to the ICSID tribunal, argued its case. So this is the rule of law. It's the international rule of law. And if the U.S. wants that to be respected, yes, there is an amount that has not been paid. By the way, there's an auction right now going on in Delaware where Citgo, which is a Venezuelan-owned company, is being auctioned off, in part to pay Conoco. But there will be an amount still that remains unpaid. I'm certain that if you want Venezuela to pay that, then if you just like allow Venezuela to start exporting oil again, it can generate the revenues needed to pay for that debt with a few months of exports. And it's never shown any unwillingness to do it. But if you block the Venezuelan economy and don't allow it to pay anything and essentially decide to starve the Venezuelan economy of resources, then you can't really ask it to pay. That's what Venezuela is saying, and it actually seems quite reasonable.
Well, I thank you for joining us, and I suspect that there are some other dark forces whispering in Trump's ear, like the Koch brothers, who have the refineries on the Texas Gulf Coast that are designed to refine the heavy crude from Venezuela. So we'll wait and see. And thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Great being here.
And again, I've been speaking with Francisco Rodríguez, who's a senior research fellow at the Center for Economic and Policy Research and a faculty affiliate at the University of Denver's Joseph Corbell School of International Studies. A native of Venezuela, he's also the founder of Oil for Venezuela, a non-profit organization focused on finding solutions to Venezuela's humanitarian crisis. And his latest book is The Collapse of Venezuela, Scorched Earth Politics and Economic Decline, 2012 to 2020. And he has an article at the Financial Times, Trump Needs an Off-Ramp in Venezuela. Sanctions and threats haven't brought regime change, but a deal could curb drugs and migration while hastening democratic reforms. I'm going to take a brief station break, back speaking with the former White House Special Assistant to the President for Technology and Competition Policy on the age of extraction, how tech platforms conquer the economy and threaten our future prosperity.
La sabe abrir. América está gritando y el siglo se vuelve azul. Pampa, ríos y montañas liberan su propia luz. La copla no quiere dueños, patrones no más mandar. La guitarra americana peleando aprendió a cantar, peleando aprendió a cantar. Peleando aprendió a cantar.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now, Tim Wu, the Julius Silver Professor of Law, Science and Technology at Columbia Law School, first known for coining the term net neutrality in 2002. In 2021, he was appointed to serve in the White House as Special Assistant to the President for Technology and Competition Policy. The author of The Master Switch and The Attention Merchants. His latest book just out is The Age of Extraction, How Tech Platforms Conquered the Economy and Threaten Our Future Prosperity. Welcome to Background Briefing, Tim Wu.
Pleasure to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us. And Tim, do you think we could broaden out the notion of an extraction economy, not just in terms of the tech platforms, but in our sort of Wall Street capitalism, if you will, which seems to be more and more about extracting wealth than creating wealth. I mean, the robber barons of old did create wealth, and it seems that hedge funds and making money out of money seems to be what's dominating our economy. Would you agree?
I would agree. I feel like two industries in particular, finance and technology, have taken the process of extraction just to levels which are even unknown towards the capitalists of 100 years ago. Just a very specialized, in some way, in the case of tech, very advanced methods of taking as most they can from the economy. And I sometimes worry that we're moving towards basically a two-class economy, the extractive class and everybody else.
Well, in a way, David Sachs in the White House embodies both, doesn't he? Because he's there in terms of the tech czar, but he's also there in terms of the crypto czar. And crypto is goes beyond extraction, right? Because the whole thing could be a fraud.
Yeah, I mean, crypto's a whole different business. A lot, in a sense, it's much right, as you said, much more about trying to get people to invest in highly speculative assets. So it's a little bit different. The kind of things I'm interested in the book in the age of extraction is the development in the tech platforms of being, better and better, better at taking from more of the economy. Now, one thing I'd stress about the tech platforms is what makes I think it's so masterful is you don't really see the prices that much. It's actually the tech platforms have mastered taking from the rest of the economy, sellers, authors, uh, the rest of business in a sense, and they have a major role in making everything so expensive, but you don't see the prices yourself from the platforms.
So you're talking way beyond surveillance capitalism.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, I think surveillance capitalism made a good point about a new form of capitalism that emerged from data processing. But no, I think my point is much broader. I like that book, but I think my point is much broader about the preeminent role of the tech platforms in the U.S. and the world economy, putting themselves in the center of everything, sort of like a middleman and taking everything. So it's not just about data or surveillance. It's more about being in on every transaction and taking money from it, such that tech becomes, such the way, in a way that's similar to finance, just the beneficiary of everything. I feel our economy has become some ways more like a casino, in the sense that the longer everyone's there, the more we lose. Let's just put it that way.
Well, this is a far cry from the hope of the early web being about public infrastructure, not private property. So, in other words, they've just loaded up the highway to the 21st century that Bill Clinton and Al Gore used to talk about with toll booths, right?
Yeah, I think it's a good way of putting it. I mean, I wrote this book as someone who believed very deeply in the promise of the internet, as a person, in the 90s who really genuinely, sincerely believed that this network held the promise to basically make everybody wealthy, to bring democracy to the whole world, to give everyone sort of an outlet for whatever creative side they have. In some ways, in the 90s, thought of the internet as kind of the fulfillment of the dream of the 60s and 70s idealists of, creating this universal language for all of us. I was bought in. So the reason I wrote this book, and in some ways was an examination of what happened to that promise. What exactly happened to the idea the internet was going to make everybody rich and make us all better? I mean, it's done some things. It certainly made some people rich, but it did not become the broad spreader of prosperity that I think many of us hoped it would become.
So, is there a reason then, or are there reasons why this great potential for enlightenment has become a conduit for trivia and, in many cases, social division?
Yes, and I think, to be honest, the business models are at fault. I think that early spirit of the internet was a non-commercial spirit, and frankly had a lot to recommend it. And I think it really did in some ways live up to some of the ideals. Everything was kind of handmade back then. The problem is that people like the Google founders who were quite idealistic in some ways also thought it was very important that they become billionaires. And frankly, that entire class uh, basically, I guess, it would be too simple to say they were greedy. I think it's more accurate to say they wanted to have everything. They wanted to talk about making the world a better place. They wanted to have the coolest technology, and they wanted to be extraordinarily rich. And they felt that there was no contradiction between these goals. I mean, these were young men who kind of think that, like many people, you could have it all. I would say, in contrast, and so they structured and set up Google, Facebook, all these companies that had sort of, in a way that the goals of Google are quite idealistic to organize all the world's information. Even the goals of Facebook, which, very much maligned corporation, were idealistic in their way to sort of connect people with friends and family, often lost people in your lives, put it all together. The challenge was, or what I think ruined everything, was the idea that these things, which are natural human processes, formerly the domains of like social clubs or libraries, you know, uh, also needed to be extraordinarily profitable and were made extraordinarily profitable. And I think that has been the downfall. And when you talk about social divisiveness and trivia and just the general, to use a friend of mine, Cory Doctorow's phrase, enshittification. Oh wait, this is public radio. Let me take that
No,
back.
no, just say
Uh,
and bleepification.
and bleepification. Um, that process is driven by the need to constantly make more money out of these things and the monopolization of the major platforms of the internet and their basically ability to get worse and worse without any form of discipline or feedback. And you make a lot more money when people are angry and fighting and rage baiting each other than a calm folk kind of thing like Wikipedia. I mean, Wikipedia is the contrasting case. And Wikipedia became a nonprofit in the early 2000s, has, basically stayed that way. And you can't blame Wikipedia for, creating the incredibly insane politics of our time. And that's because Jimmy Wales, who founded Wikipedia, understood that there was going to be trade-offs in life and trade-offs in what you built. So that's a short version of the story of how we got here.
Well, but it's not just that the owners and founders of Google got rich. They got incredibly rich and they become incredibly powerful. And Zuckerberg and Thiel and Sachs and most of all Elon Musk have turned their vast fortunes into politics. Thiel bankrolled J.D. Vance, who, given Trump's deteriorating mental and physical state, may well be president before we know it. I mean, these people are really deeply involved in the power structure of the United States and are shaping our policy, and even to the extent that they're also getting into the defense sector. Instead of a military-industrial complex, we may have tech-industrial complex in the future with Anduril and Palantir. So it's not just that they got rich, that they're deploying their wealth to capture our politics as well as our eyeballs.
Yes, I agree with that, and I think it's important to kind of take a step back and look at what Silicon Valley has become and what it was. I mean, there was a time where Silicon Valley and the computing industry in general relished its outsider status, had the idea that, government was something you didn't want to tangle with, that it was better to be away from it. They wanted nothing to do with the defense industry. They were, libertarians who, in a good way, I mean, I don't agree with libertarianism in general, but I do believe that there's an important principle of thinking you want to be apart from government, that trying to cultivate government is inherently corrupting. And that was the 70s, 80s kind of vision of Silicon Valley. The change has been kind of absolute. I think Silicon Valley, as you suggested, has turned its money and tried to turn it into government influence. People like Elon Musk have wanted to serve a government themselves, although his tenure was very short and predictably ridiculous. And people like Mark Andreessen may not be known to your listener, but he's a major Silicon Valley investor, hedge fund, not a hedge fund, VC figure, think nothing is more important than investing in the defense industrial complex. And so it's just a totally different kind of place. And I think sometimes you don't appreciate it until you lose it. And what's happened is Silicon Valley has become what it hated. It has become much more like the old AT&T empire. Some listeners may remember in 1984, Apple had this advertisement. Actually, that was against IBM. IBM and AT&T, the old monopolies, who were these terrifying companies that collaborated with national security and, never didn't invent very many things very quickly. They have become what they hated in Silicon Valley, and to our detriment, because not only are we influenced just in terms of what kind of people are in government, but also the most basic protections, like privacy protections, are totally off limits. There's, no chance, even of, say, protecting children, which seems like the basic job of government is protect children against, things like the privacy invasion, surveillance. That's impossible to do anything about while tech has influence over Washington. So it's a terrible thing, and it's something I tried to fight when I was in government myself. But it is a very powerful force in Washington, the rise of basically the tech industrial complex.
So, what can we talk about then, Tim, in terms of what can be done to roll back this sort of malevolent turn in this hopeful tool, where Cory Doctorow, who I recently talked to, has described it as emblepification, which implies that it's just going to get more and more toxic. But, for example, the government of Australia has taken on big tech and banned social media from kids under 16 in Australia. And I think it's probably got Silicon Valley's attention. And is there a possibility that other countries are going to follow suit? Or
Yes,
is that a good move, do you think?
I do think that's a good move. I mean, I was one of the things that I think we're at risk of losing is our own sovereignty. But I am, in my heart, genuinely optimistic. I mean, even though companies have a lot of influence, in some level they are paper tigers when people finally get fed up and decide we've had enough of this. And, I think that big tech in some ways is overreaching, particularly when these comes to issues like the protection of children or privacy or just the amount they're taking from the economy overall to invest in strange projects. And I think if ask most Americans, so they think that the tech firms have too much power over the economy or themselves, they would say yes and would support laws. So if democracy works, and that's always a challenging proposition because you have to get actual votes on things. But if democracy works, I think there is a menu, a playbook for controlling the power of big tech. What I think is that we should treat big tech more like we treat, let's say, some of the most powerful electric companies or phone companies historically, or the train companies, which is we should accept that they are essential. We should accept, that they're going to be in the economy, but we shouldn't let them do anything they want. They should not be allowed to take so much from the rest of the economy, and particularly when they have pernicious influence on children or other vulnerable groups. I think, like any dangerous product, it should be regulated. I mean, for goodness sakes, we regulate children's toys quite carefully so they, so they don't hurt children, and every parent knows that. And there was a dark old age where, children would play with toys, and every so often one would die. Well, what's the difference with social media? Children play with social media, and every so often, someone dies as a result of it. And the idea that we just think, oh, well, that just can't be helped is completely ridiculous. I mean, I think we should submit social media to at least the kind of protection that toys get. And furthermore, certain categories, just like full-on social media, I think should be banned or strictly limited for people below a certain age, because very little comes good of it. As a parent myself, I see the effect on people, and the more, kids love it. I mean, of course they have fun with it, but that is the beginning of recapturing our sovereignty, which is taking back control over our own children.
But it's going to get worse, isn't it, with AI? And I noticed that Silicon Valley, who clearly have captured J.D. Vance and have influenced Trump, and after all, Musk, it was the biggest donor to the Republicans in the last campaign. They were already preemptively trying to stop states from regulating AI. So isn't that the next challenge?
I think AI is a serious challenge. By the way, Elon Musk, among his donations, was buying Twitter, which was like an in-kind $43 billion donation to Trump and the Republican Party, probably the biggest donation in human history in certain ways, in addition to the traditional campaign violations. Yes, I think artificial intelligence for children, or just in general, poses new risks. There's an obvious business model that depends on inducing emotional reliance. And the firms themselves, OpenAI is very candid. OpenAI started as a safety-based and nonprofit, and so they still have vestigial, lingering parts of them that are very concerned about the risks of AI, and they talk openly about the risks of inducing reliance on AI emotionally as you begin to think it's your friend, or even a companion or someone you count on for support. And I think children are particularly vulnerable to that kind of thing, although frankly many of us are. And when it becomes scary, I think, is when it becomes a business model. And you can see how that would be tempting. Companies have very often relied on emotional reliance as a business model. In fact, a lot of branding is a form of emotional manipulation at some point or another to make you believe this brand really matters or stands for something. So yes, I am worried things are going to get worse. I agree the politics are not lined up well, but I also think, it's easy to overestimate. This is still a very small segment of U.S. society that really loves and believes in AI. I think the majority of Americans, and frankly of people in the world, are quite suspicious and guarded about this technology. And if the pressure is enough, I still have faith in the people to win. It just needs to be clear, and you need representatives that are subjected to real pressure from democratic sources.
So just in closing then, Tim Wu, is there anything you can say to our audience as to why they need your book?
Yeah, I think this is a book for people who, were excited about the internet and wanted to see what it could do. And in some ways, still kind of excited and optimistic, but wonder exactly what happened and what is the diagnosis of what went wrong and how we can fix it. So it's a person, who believes in that, and a person who ultimately understands what we can do to have the kind of country that we want to have with a much more balanced economy. So for anyone who's interested in that vision, or anyone who's read my previous two books on information technology in the 20th century, this is in a way a third of a trilogy. So yeah, I hope it would bring readers some understanding of the times we live in.
Well, in the KPFA signal area, of course, you have Silicon Valley. So I think it's very helpful that you've joined us here today.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much.
And again, I've been speaking with Tim Wu, who's a Julius Silver Professor of Law, Science and Technology at Columbia Law School, first known for coining the term net neutrality in 2002. In 2021, he was appointed to serve in the White House as Special Assistant to the President for Technology and Competition Policy. The author of The Master Switch and The Attention Merchants. His latest book just out is The Age of Extraction, How Tech Platforms Conquer the Economy and Threaten Our Future Prosperity. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Asher Price, and Sasha Linden-Cohen. If you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org. where we include extended interviews, searchable by topic, and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates and provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Facebook at Ian Masters Media, and our new social media manager, Luke Susswood, is also posting highlights from the show on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Ian Masters Media. So please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate and/or at publictruthmedia.org, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back tomorrow with another background briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.
By 9:30, who'll ever know how much she loved them so? That dark night alone in America. A quiet voice singing something to me. An angel song about the home of the brave in this land here of the free. One time, one night in America. Four small boys playing ball in the parking lot. A preacher, a teacher, and the other became a cop. A car skidded into the rain, making the last little one to say one more life.